Hey, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and in this video, we're going to take a look at what's new in Oxygen 3.6. Oxygen 3.6 includes a couple of new features and a ton of bug fixes, mostly for long-standing PHP errors. So let's go ahead and jump into the first new feature. You've been asking for quite a while, and we finally added it. Rem units are in. So any field that uses a unit where rem is appropriate, rem will be available. Now, if you aren't familiar with rem units are based on the font size of the HTML element. So say your HTML font size is 16 pixels, which is the default. 1 rem would equal 16 pixels. 2 rem would equal 32, so on and so forth. So if you set all your font sizes in rem units, then if you adjust the font size of your HTML element, then all of those fonts using rem scale appropriately with that root font size. We've also added custom units, which basically take Oxygen's role in generating a unit out of the equation and let you type in whatever you want. So if you choose the none unit in the unit dropdown, you can use units that aren't available in Oxygen, or you can use CSS functions like calc and clamp and min and max and all of that stuff. So this is a more advanced feature that a lot of developers will enjoy having available. And I'll just jump into Oxygen real quick and show you how these work. So first, talking about rem, it's based off of the font size of the HTML element, which defaults to 16 pixels. But if you want to change that root font size, you can go to Manage Selectors and add a selector for the HTML element. And then you can just go to Advanced Typography and change the font size to whatever you want that root font size to be. So that's really, really convenient. And then once that's set up, you can go in and pick any text element or any element where you want to use a rem unit, and you can change its unit here to rem and then set the font size appropriately. Now this one's already 16 pixels, but if we go to rem, it's going to go to 32. We can even go down to 1.5 rem if we want to be somewhere in between. So again, this is really handy and something a lot of folks have been asking for, and I'm excited that it's finally added to our units list. Now, talking about the custom units and CSS functions, if we select the unit dropdown and go down to the none unit, that literally removes the unit. So now whatever we type here is interpreted literally. So we can do 1 rem if we want. We can do 2 rem. We can also use CSS functions like calc 2 rem minus 5 pixels, right? So that gives us a calculated value. You can use clamp, which is super handy for fluid typography, and pretty much anything you want, you can type in here and use the power of those custom units and CSS functions right within Oxygen. So let's just put this back to where it was. So that pretty much covers the rem units and custom units feature. Now let's move on to the next and arguably more exciting feature, which is edit mode. So if you've been using Oxygen for any length of time and have handed Oxygen sites off to clients, you know that one of the concerns with Oxygen is that anyone with access to Oxygen can write PHP, HTML, and CSS and JavaScript in the builder, as well as manipulate elements so fully that if you let a non-technical client loose in Oxygen, it's very possible that they will be careless and break things. Edit mode introduces granular controls over user access to Oxygen based on roles or individual users. Now note that edit mode is only available if you have an active Oxygen agency license. Some of the things that are restricted in edit mode include code block manipulation, meaning if you're in Oxygen with edit only access, you can't manipulate code blocks at all. Oxygen meta box will be hidden for users with edit only access. Oxygen admin menu will be replaced with just a link to Oxygen templates. The manage button in the Oxygen interface is hidden. The add button is hidden. They cannot delete classes or copy styles between classes and IDs or clear styles on selectors. No access to conditions, no access to converting things to link wrappers, no access to duplicating elements, no access to deleting elements. Cannot add classes, and cannot drag and drop. So users with edit-only access really are very limited, primarily to content editing. But we know that that's not going to be perfect for everyone, and that will be far too restrictive for some use cases. So we also added granular permissions, which allow you to enable things like adding elements, the advanced tab in the properties pane, drag and drop, reusable parts, design library, and optionally disable classes entirely so that users cannot edit the styles on classes, which can be handy if you're using like utility classes and they don't need to be manipulated by the client. And again, I want to say this is per user or per role, where most of these client mode controls are usually per role. We also added a per user option, and I'll just jump into the back and show you what that looks like. So here we are in Oxygen settings in the WordPress admin panel under the new client control tab. We've moved the post type manager and the role manager here to kind of consolidate everything in one place. So if we want to grant a specific role edit only access to Oxygen, for instance, editor, we can go in here and select edit only. And then we have these granular options. We can enable advanced tab, all these things we discussed. And another cool part is when we enable elements, we actually get to choose which specific elements the user has access to. So we can add sections, divs, etc. And this will allow them not only to add those elements, but also delete those elements because, well, if they're adding something, they need to be able to remove it also. And if it's a particularly advanced user, we can throw in the advanced tab, which will give them access to everything in the advanced tab that's not custom code. But let's say you have a client who needs administrative access to WordPress and wants to be able to edit content in Oxygen, but you're not comfortable just giving them everything and letting them run wild. Well, we can go down to per user access, and this will override any settings that are defined up here in the role manager. So if we add a user, we can select an administrative user even and give them edit only access. And each of these user rules has their own granular control. So you could have two administrators with completely different levels of access with edit only mode. So in this way, this edit mode has given you really complete control over how your client accesses Oxygen and gives you another option in addition to the Gutenberg integration to let a client get in and edit the things they need to edit without running the risk of altering or damaging your design or the site in general. And I also want to show you what Oxygen looks like to a user with edit only access. So I'm going to save this for the editor role, and then I'm going to jump over to the same site as an editor user, and we're going to edit this in Oxygen. You can see here that as a user with edit only access, I have a new Oxygen button here instead of the meta box. So it's a much cleaner interface, and I'm going to click this to jump into the builder. And here we are in the builder, and let's just talk about the differences. Of course, I discussed what all is disabled, but here you can actually see it in action. So we just have the hide option here for the side pane. And the reason we still have the side pane is because you can, in fact, manipulate the primary tab properties of elements while you're in edit only mode. But we can hide this. We can also get into the structure. We have access to history. We have access to back to WP with admin and front end, and that's about it on the top bar. But then, like I showed you, if we select an element, all we have is the primary properties here. So we don't have the advanced tab, we don't have the ability to add classes, we don't have the ability to delete, duplicate, or add conditions to these elements or convert them to links. In the structure pane, we cannot delete elements, etc. And here are some code blocks. I can't even click them to do anything with them. So it's a much more streamlined experience for users that don't need all of the advanced functionality, and we can still go in and make edits to these elements. And we can save them and check it out on the front end, and it's just like you're used to in Oxygen, except for it's restricted specifically for users that don't need to have all of the capabilities all at once. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Oxygen 3.6 also includes a few tweaks and quite a few bug fixes. So we're excited to get this out to our users. Again, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and that's what's new in Oxygen 3.6. Thank you very much for watching.